All right, we're back with another video here. What we're going to do is we're going to answer some of these questions. We're working on capital budgeting tools. We've already worked an example or two in the previous videos, and so here we're just going to solidify our understanding of using these capital budgeting tools to make financial decisions about investments for firms. Okay, so let's just look at the first problem here. Suppose a capital investment project that costs $210 million produces the following cash flows in each of the next 4 years. And I give you the table there. And I ask you the questions. What is the payback rule on this project? What's the net present value? The discount rate is 13.5%. What's the profitability index? If the discount rate's 13.5%, what's the IRR? Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So let's start with the payback method. Now recall from previous videos here, net present value, profitability index, and IRR all account for the time value money. They all account for the cash flows. And because we're using a discount rate, they talk to us about the riskiness of the project. The payback method doesn't. What the payback method does is tells us how quickly we're able to pay back the initial cost of the investment. Okay. So what we got to do here, we got to do some math, some simple arithmetic. 84 plus 75 is 159. Okay. So it looks like we pay back after 2 years, we pay back 159 of the 210 million. All right. And then we earn 64 million in year 3. So at some point towards the latter part of the second year, we will end up paying back this amount. Okay. So what I got to do is I got to figure out how much is remaining, how much money is remaining after year 2 that I need to pay back. So 210 minus 159 is going to be 51 million. My math does me right. And so the payback period is going to be 2 years plus the 51 million that we need to pay back divided by the 64 or 80 or 64 million that we're going to receive in year 3. Okay. So if I hit that, it looks like 2.18 years. That's our payback method. Okay. So we'll pay it back in 2.8 years. Now, again, the payback method doesn't account for the time value money. However, it's a quick way, especially when a firm is trying to determine or compare projects, it's a quick way to figure out which projects are most likely to pay back soonest. Okay. To calculate net present value, this is straightforward. I'm going to say equals NPV. The discount rate is 13.5%. And I'm going to highlight the values. Now be careful here. When I highlight the values, I'm going to highlight the future cash flows. And I didn't include my initial cost of the project. I'm going to close my parentheses, and then I'm going to subtract off the initial cost of the project. Okay. So again, the net present value tells us the profitability of this project in present value terms. It looks like it's 19.03 million. That's positive. That suggests that the net present value, or that this particular project, according to the net present value, is going to be profitable. So that's a good sign. To calculate the profitability index, I say equals NPV. My rate is 13.5%. Again, I'm going to highlight my future cash flows. And then instead of subtracting off the rate or off the initial cost of the investment, I'm going to divide by 210. Okay. And this is going to give me a profitability index greater than 1. I knew that was greater than 1 because the net present value was positive. All right. And last but not least, I got to calculate the IRR. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say equals IRR. And all I have to do is highlight the values. Now, when calculating IRR, I have to include that year 0's cash flow or the initial cost of the project. And it has to be considered a negative outflow. All right. Close my parentheses. And I get 17.85. I knew that number was going to be greater than 13.5%. So 17.85% is greater than 13.5%. I knew that because the IRR, because the net present value is positive. And again, the IRR is telling us what rate will make the net present value 0. For instance, I go back up here, and instead of 13.5, I say 17.85 minus a little bit of rounding. Notice I get 0. Okay, so that shouldn't come as a surprise. All right, that's how we calculate the capital budgeting tools for this first set of problems. Let's continue. Let's do this next set. All right. So here we have year 0, year 1, 2, and year 3, and the cash flows in year 0. It's gonna we're looking at investing in an investment project that costs $36.5 billion. I said 5, I meant 7. $36.7 billion. And we're going to receive 11.7, 17.5, and 14.2 billion each of the next 3 years. Okay. The question is what is the payback method, and what are the other measures of these capital budgeting tools? So let's put that back here. Okay. Again, my payback method, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to figure out how long it will take for me to pay off this particular project. If you add up the first 2 cash flows, okay, 11.7 plus 17.5 gives you $29.2 billion. Okay. So in other words, I will pay off 29.2 billion of the 36.7 billion initial cost after 2 years. So again, like the first set of problems, this particular project will pay back the initial cost of the investment somewhere between the second and the third year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say $36.7 billion minus 29.2 billion, which is the sum of the first and second year's cash flow, give me 7.5 billion remaining after year 2. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I know I'm going to pay this back in 2 years and a little bit of time. I'm going to take the remaining amount that I need to pay back after the second year, which is 7.5. I'm going to divide that by the third year's cash flow, 14.2. And that's going to give me 2.53 years. Okay. Let's pause here and talk about why we would use the payback method. It doesn't account for the time value money. It doesn't account for risk. There isn't a solid decision rule, but let's assume that this particular company had an opportunity to invest in this first project, the $210 million investment project, or the $36.7 billion investment project. And then you'll see that the second project, we're going to pay that initial cost back sooner, 2.53 years instead of 2.8 years. So the payback method allows us to quickly compare the 2 different projects. And to the extent that we want to be paid back sooner rather than later, and that should be our objective, it looks like the second project might be more favorable than the first project. All right, let's continue this second project. Let's calculate the net present value. The discount rate here, I'm looking at number 6. The net present value if the discount rate is 11%. Enter 11%. And then highlight the future cash flows. And subtract off my initial cost, 36.7 billion. And it looks like the net present value of this project is negative 1.57 billion. So while the payback method, comparing these first 2 projects, is shorter, right? Is shorter for the second project, it looks like this is negative net present value. Let me calculate the profitability index here. I'm going to say the net present value with an 11% discount rate. I'm going to highlight my future cash flows. And instead of subtracting off the initial cost of the project, I'm going to divide by the initial cost of the project. And I'm going to get something less than 1, right? Because I know that the net present value is negative. And there you see a profitability index of 0.96. To calculate my IRR, I'm simply going to highlight all of my cash flows, including my initial cost. And I should get an IRR, something less than 11% because my net present value is negative. I get 9%. In fact, let me add a little bit of decimals there. 8.6%. Okay. Let's pause here and let's calculate these on the financial calculator for those that prefer using this thing. I'm particularly interested in calculating the net present value here. I'm going to enter my cash flows. The cash flow in year 0 of the second project is 36.7 billion. Note that that's an outflow, so I've got to enter that as a negative number. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to scroll down. The cash flow in year 1 is going to be 11.7. That's an inflow. I'll keep that positive. I hit enter, scroll down. F01 stands for the frequency of the first year's cash flow. By default, that's 1. And notice that I only have 1 year of 11.7 billion in cash flow, so I'll continue to scroll down. The cash flow in year 2 is 17.5 billion. Enter. The frequency of the second year's cash flow is 1. The cash flow in year 3 is 14.2. Scroll down to make sure that the frequency in year 3 is 1. I'm going to go back through my cash flow worksheet and make sure they look the same. Negative 36.7, 11.7, 17.5, and 14.2. Okay, to calculate net present value on the financial calculator, I hit net present value. My discount rate is 11%. I hit enter and scroll down and hit the compute button. And when I do, I get a negative 1.57. That corresponds with cell B11. So it looks like this is a negative net present value project. All right. To calculate the profitability index, I'm going to do something a little different here. So I calculated the net present value to be negative 1.5731. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add back the initial cost of the project. So I added back the initial cost of the project. And this number right here, 35.1269, this is the present value of the future cash flows. So remember, when I'm calculating the profitability index over here, I take the net present value of my future cash flows and I divide by the initial cost. So what I've done is I found the numerator here by adding that initial cost back in. I have a present value of future cash flows of 35.1269. I'm going to divide that by the 36.7. And that's going to give me the 0.96 or 0.9571 number that I solve for in B12. Okay. To solve for IRR, I simply click IRR. My cash flows have been entered in correctly. Click IRR and hit compute. And I get a IRR of 8.597, rounded to be 8.6%. Okay, so that's how we do problem 2. Let's go ahead and finish this off and calculate the last problem here. I got 2 more. Yeah, let's do this. So number 9, suppose a capital investment project costs 51.8 million and produces the following cash flows over the next 3 years. The company has a discount rate of 10.5. I ask, should the company invest in the project and why? Okay, we have something here going on. Notice that I have non-conventional cash flows. And if you remember from the previous video, I talked about issues with IRR. So whenever we have non-conventional cash flows, that means we have a cash flow that might be negative in the middle of 2 positive cash flows. We need to be careful here, all right? So what we can do in solving for problem 9 is we can use net present value. Whenever there's unconventional cash flows, whenever we face either mutually exclusive projects or we face multiple rate of return projects or unconventional cash flows, we use net present value. So let me just calculate the net present value here. I've got year 2, 3. My cash flow in year 0 is the negative outflow of 51.8 million. Cash flow in year 1 is 36.8. Cash flow in year 2 is negative 1.51 million. Cash flow in year 3 is 37.9. Okay. Say equals net present value. My rate of return, discount rate is 10.5%. And then I'm going to highlight these future cash flows and subtract off the 51.8 million. Okay. So again, with non-conventional cash flows, I can't use the IRR. It's not going to give me a correct answer. And I get a net present value of 8.36 million. Again, this is positive, so I should invest. To verify that, the profitability index I'm going to highlight the future cash flows, and instead of subtracting off the initial cost, I'm going to divide by 51.8. I get 1.16. For practice, why don't we calculate the payback method? All right. In year one, we pay back 36.8 million of the 51.8 million. Okay. In year two, we actually lose money. So 36.8 subtract off year two's 1.51. And by the end of year two, I've paid back 35.29%. So the sum of these two, I'll just do that over here, is going to be equal to 35.29. So how much do I have remaining? I'm going to say equals the 51.8 minus the 35.29. I have 16.51 million remaining to pay off. Okay. To calculate my payback, I know this is going to be 2 years and a little bit of change. I'm going to take this number, divide that by the cash flow in year 3, assuming that all of the cash is received evenly throughout the year. And my payback is going to be 2.44 years. Okay. So hopefully this is making sense here. This was my payback. This was my NPV. This was my profitability index. And note, I can't do my IRR because I have non-conventional cash flows and I'm likely to get a wrong answer here. Okay. Let's finish this worksheet off. Let's solve problem 10. Okay. Looks like I've got a capital investment project that's going to cost 114 million. Actually, let me enter my years here. Struggling. $114 million cost of the project. That's an outflow. It's negative in year 0. 44.1, 68.9, and 51.5. Okay, the objective is to calculate the payback, the net present value, the IRR, the profitability index. Okay, let's figure out what this is going to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sum these two cash flows in year 1 and 2. And of the 114 million, it looks like I pay off 113 million in the first 2 years. So there's only 1 million left. So I'm going to pay back this project. I'm going to pay back the cost of this project right after the start of year 2. So my payback method is equal to 2 plus 1 divided by 51.5. And I have a payback period of 2.02 years. To calculate net present value, I'm going to use a financial calculator this time just to mix it up. I'm going to enter my cash flow worksheet, 114 million negative outflow. I'm going to enter that in year 0. My cash flow in year 1 is 44.1. My cash flow in year 2 is going to be 68.9. My cash flow in year 3 is going to be 51.5. I'm going to double check all my work. Negative 114 in year 0, 44.1 in year 1, 68.9 in year 2, 51.5 in year 3. Okay. And notice in problem 10 that the company has a discount rate of 8.97%. You enter my discount rate, enter, scroll down and compute net present value. And I get a large net present value of 24.2938 million. So this thing looks profitable. To calculate my profitability index, recall, I have 24.29 million. That's after I've subtracted off the initial cost. I'm going to add that initial cost back in. And this is 138.2938 is going to give me the present value of these future cash flows. To get the profitability index, I then have to divide the present value of these future cash flows by the 114. And I get a profitability index of 1.21. Okay, so that it makes logical sense. It's greater than 1 because my net present value is greater than 0. To calculate my IRR, I click IRR and hit compute. and I know that my IRR has got to be greater than the 8.97% discount rate because the net present value is positive. And there you see an IRR of 20.2172%. So hopefully by now we feel comfortable calculating or using these capital budgeting tools. And just one last thing, these tools are not making the decision about whether or not to invest in these projects. The tools are basically giving us information that's going to inform our decision. Okay. So I think that's important, right? Look, this particular project, this last project, $114 million project that produces these cash flows, this thing looks like it's going to be super profitable. The net present value was huge. The profitability index was large, and the IRR is much greater than the discount rate. So, looking at this particular problem, it seems as though, or this project, it seems as though this thing's going to be profitable. But it's important to note that this is all based on assumptions about cash flows. Okay, we assume that these cash flows are correct. All right. And in a subsequent discussion, we're going to talk about how we would go about estimating these cash flows. And as we go about talking about how to estimate these cash flows, it's going to become apparent that that we face a risk, a forecast risk here. There might be times where we're off base when we forecast these cash flows. We'll show you that in subsequent videos.